Help me. Somebody, please help me. The frantic voice crackled through the emergency dispatcher's headset. There's a crocodile attacking my neighbor, Alan Bennett. He's trapped inside the enclosure. Please, hurry. I can hear him screaming. The line went silent. There's blood everywhere. Please, send someone now. In the quiet suburb of Riverside Valley, Texas, a backyard sanctuary concealed a deadly secret. For 7 years, Alan Bennett had raised a crocodile named Gambino, nurturing him from a fragile hatchling into a 13-foot apex predator. What unfolded on that September afternoon would leave the community reeling and spark a heated debate over the risks of keeping wild predators as pets. Chapter 1. The Trainer's Dream. At 32, Alan Bennett was well known in Riverside Valley, a town more associated with cattle ranchers than exotic animals. He was a familiar local figure, equally admired and feared. Alan wasn't just interested in reptiles, he was completely devoted. From lizards to snakes to turtles, he kept them all. But none captivated him like the small crocodile hatchling. He bought 8 years ago from a licensed breeder. It was barely the length of his hand, just 10 inches long, with sharp yellow eyes and a tender, vulnerable belly. Most would have felt fear. Alan felt fascination. He saw promise. He believed that even nature's most feared predators could bond with humans. He named the hatchling Gambino, after a beloved movie character. Friends said their connection was instant. Alan often joked that Gambino recognized his voice from day one, that he was the only father figure the young reptile had ever known. With all the proper permits in place, Alan was legally allowed to care for Gambino at his private exotic animal facility. As the years passed, Gambino grew both in size and strength. By age 3, he measured over 6 feet long. By age 5, nearly 10. As Gambino grew, so did the attention. Locals began to take notice. So did wildlife authorities. Officers repeatedly warned Alan. Crocodiles, no matter how familiar they seem, are wild predators. Their instincts, territorial aggression, food dominance can never be tamed. But Alan refused to believe Gambino was dangerous. To him, he wasn't just a crocodile, he was family. Alan fed him by hand. He swam with him in a custom-built pool. He even let the massive reptile bask freely in the backyard sun while he worked nearby. Photos and videos flooded social media. Gambino obeying commands like a trained dog. Reactions ranged from awe to horror. He treated Gambino like a best friend, one colleague later said. Maybe that was his biggest mistake. For 7 years, nothing went wrong, until the day it did, suddenly, violently, and beyond imagining. Chapter 2. Building the Bondalon's obsession began in the spring of 2016. During a visit to a reptile breeding center outside Houston, the owner, veteran handler Marcus Webb, remembered the visit clearly. Most folks go for the showy reptiles, pythons, monitors, Webb said. Stuff that looks impressive but won't kill you. Alan was different. He bypassed the snakes and lizards and made a beeline for the crocodile enclosures. That's when he saw him, a tiny hatchling, barely 6 inches long, chirping softly, in a small enclosure, alone. Unlike any reptile he'd owned before, Alan made a commitment that day. He applied for and was granted special permits to house the crocodile. Indefinitely, Gambino's first home was a large indoor tank with heating, lamps, and a custom water feature. But that was just the beginning. What followed was a bond built on trust, repetition, and bold belief. A belief that one man could tame what nature had forged as a killer. And for a long time, It seemed like he had chapter to continued. A dangerous. Bondalon hand-fed Gambino ground chicken mixed with vitamins, tapping gently on the glass to signal feeding time. He approached the routine with the devotion of a new father, documenting every meal, every inch of growth, every shift in behavior. He kept detailed records, said Mike Torres, a longtime friend who occasionally helped with feedings. He tracked Gambino's weight, his eating patterns, even his moods. It was like watching someone raise a dog. As Gambino grew, so did the complexity of his care. By the time the crocodile reached 4 feet, Alan had transformed a former backyard pool into a custom-built outdoor enclosure. It featured basking rocks, underwater hiding spots, and a state-of-the-art filtration system. Alan swam with Gambino regularly, claiming it strengthened their trust. In his eyes, the crocodile's calm demeanor in the water, his predictable feeding responses, and his apparent recognition of Alan's voice were all proof of a real bond. But to seasoned reptile experts, these behaviors told a very different story: signs of conditioning, not companionship; routine, not relationship. Crocodiles are intelligent, explained Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a herpetologist who inspected the setup during a routine permit check. They can learn patterns, recognize individuals, even mimic affection. But underneath all that, they remain wild. They don't unlearn what they are. Dr. Martinez warned Alan repeatedly. She was concerned that his confidence had drifted into delusion. But Alan dismissed her fears. He touched Gambino without fear. He floated beside him. He even stroked the crocodile's massive, scaled head. Gambino remained motionless, calm, perhaps even comforted Dr. Alan. That was all the evidence he needed. Gambino wasn't just an animal. He was family. And for 7 years, it seemed Alan was right. Gambino never showed aggression, never snapped, never lashed out. He was silent, patient, obedient. But nature has a way of reminding us. Wild never forgets wild. Chapter 3, The Warning Signs. By 2023. Gambino had become a creature out of time, 13 feet long, nearly 800 pounds of prehistoric power, a living relic of nature's most efficient design, now kept in a suburban Texas backyard. Gone were the days of hand-feeding. Instead, Alan tossed in whole chickens, fish, and large chunks of meat from a safe distance. Gambino devoured them with a thunderous crack of jaws, a sound that shook the ground, a reminder of the deadly force he possessed. Still, Alan kept entering the water during cleaning sessions, still spoke to Gambino in soft tones, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Neighbors began to report unsettling incidents. Deep hissing noises during feeding sessions echoed down the street. Robert Chen, who lived 2 houses away, recalled a chilling moment. Gambino reared up and slammed his tail against the wall when Alan came out with food. The whole ground shook. That tail, it could break your ribs. A teenage girl walking her dog past the property said she dropped her water bottle near the fence and Gambino lunged, jaws wide, instant and violent. The sound alone had triggered him. State Wildlife Officer Patricia Reynolds had visited the property multiple times after receiving growing complaints. "I've seen exotic animal cases before," she said, "but this was different. That croc was too big, too powerful. I told Alan directly, you can't control a force like that forever." But Alan wouldn't budge. He believed no one understood Gambino like he did, that the crocodile was still calm, still loyal, still safe. Online. He continued to post videos, sitting beside the enclosure, Gambino floating close by. "People fear what they don't understand," he said in one clip. looking directly into the camera. Gambino isn't dangerous. He knows me. He trusts me. But in the comments section, the public sentiment was shifting fast admiration, turning into dread. Chapter 4. The day everything changed, September 15th, 2023, began like any other morning in Riverside Valley. The early air carried a crispness that hinted at the coming fall. For Alan Bennett, it was just another maintenance day at his backyard sanctuary. The filtration system in Gambino's pool needed cleaning, and an algae bloom required treatment, nothing he hadn't handled countless times before. Gambino was in his usual spot, motionless near the shallow end, his 13-foot frame stretched out in the still water. His eyes were half closed, a picture of calm, familiar and deceptively reassuring. But this time, something was different. Unbeknownst to Alan, Gambino was entering a behavioral state known to reptile experts as seasonal aggression syndrome. As temperatures dipped and daylight waned, the crocodile's ancient instincts were stirring. Territoriality, hyper-awareness, readiness to defend. Alan, carrying his usual gear, a net, pool chemicals, water testing kit, and a hose, entered the enclosure with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this 100 times before. "Morning, big guy," he said casually, like he always did. Gambino's eyes locked onto him, still unmoving, still silent. But this time, it wasn't relaxation, it was focus. Predatory, measured, and intense. Alan knelt near the pool's edge and dipped his test kit into the water. Elevated nitrate levels, low pH. The algae bloom was disrupting the ecosystem. Nearby, Gambino shifted, his tail disturbing the water in gentle ripples. Alan glanced over. The crocodile was no longer drifting aimlessly. He was now oriented directly toward Alan, body aligned like a missile with its target. "You're watching me work, buddy." Alan chuckled, misreading the moment entirely. But something didn't feel quite right. Gambino's posture had changed, tense, rigid. His usually sleepy eyes were wide open, locked onto Alan's every move. His nostrils flared, and his tail undulated subtly beneath the surface. Classic signs of heightened alertness in crocodilians. But Alan never recognized the warning signs. In his mind, Gambino was just curious, attentive, maybe even playful. "What's wrong, buddy?" he asked, gently, voice as calm and familiar as ever. Gambino didn't react as he normally would. Instead, he began to reposition himself, sliding silently through the water, until he stood between Alan and the enclosure exit. Alan, unaware that he was now inside the crocodile's claimed territory, continued working. He dropped to his knees at the pool's edge, reaching for a clogged intake filter. The water was murky, clouded by algae. Visibility was poor. Rolling up his sleeves, he plunged one arm in, feeling his way along the intake valve. "Almost got it," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the quiet splash of water. What he didn't see, what he never could have anticipated, was Gambino shifting again, silently closing the gap between them to just under 8 feet. Beneath the water, the crocodile's limbs braced, his massive body coiled with explosive tension. He was no longer a companion. He was a predator preparing to strike. Chapter 5. The attack-along should have seen it coming. The body language, the focused gaze, the subtle shifts in posture, every signal was there. But years of routine had dulled his instincts. He believed he knew Gambino better than anyone else ever could. So, when he finally dislodged the obstruction from the filter and felt a brief sense of accomplishment, it seemed like just another successful day, another task completed. Another peaceful moment with the animal he considered family. He had no idea that his next movement would be his last. That confidence, carefully built over 7 years, would prove to be his fatal mistake. At approximately 2:30 p.m., Alan Bennett was knee-deep in the water, adjusting a filtration intake valve clogged with debris. 10 feet away, Gambino floated silently, only the top of his head visible above the surface. There was no warning, no sound, no growl, just sudden violence. In a blur of motion, Gambino surged forward, the water erupting with thunderous force. His tail whipped with explosive power, propelling 800 pounds of reptilian muscle across the pool like a torpedo. Hundreds of gallons of water displaced in seconds. The impact sounded like a car crash, brutal and chaotic. Alan had no time to react. In less than 2 seconds, Gambino closed the distance, his massive jaws clamping down on Alan's right leg with more than 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Bones snapped like dry wood. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. The force pulled Alan beneath the surface. Murky water rushed into his mouth and lungs as he struggled to orient himself. Pain blinding and immediate tripped through his body. Gambino's teeth, some nearly 4 inches long, had sunk through muscle and bone with terrifying precision. Then came the death roll. With primal instinct, Gambino spun, twisting violently through the water. His entire body coiled in evolutionary muscle memory. Alan was dragged like a rag doll. Water churned violently around them as the crocodile spun. Again and again, turning pain into agony, disorientation into sheer panic. Each roll fractured more bone, shredded more tissue. Alan's head surfaced just long enough to scream, but the scream barely carried Margaret Phillips. The neighbor next door was hanging laundry when she heard the thrashing and cries. She dropped the basket and ran to the fence. "I saw his arm come up out of the water," she later recalled, voice trembling. "He was reaching, trying to hold on to anything." She watched, frozen in horror, as Gambino rolled again, pulling Alan fully underwater. Then the blood appeared thick. Dark plumes spreading through the green-tinged pool water, turning it into a horrifying mix of algae and red. Margaret's hand shook as she fumbled for her phone. "There's a crocodile attacking my neighbor," she told the 911 dispatcher, her voice breaking. "He's in the water. There's so much blood. Please send someone now. I think he's dying." Inside the enclosure, the nightmare continued. Gambino was no longer the companion Alan had raised. The years of training, bonding, familiarity, they were gone, replaced by something older, deeper, and merciless. A wild predator had taken over, and it was doing exactly what nature had designed it to do: kill. Alan fought with the desperation of a man who knew he was dying. He clawed at Gambino's eyes, trying to force the massive reptile to release his grip. But his efforts were like trying to stop a locomotive with bare hands. The death rolls continued with mechanical precision, each one designed to disorient the prey, to break bones and rupture organs. Alan's vision began to blur as blood loss and shock started to take their toll. With each passing moment, Alan's struggles grew weaker. The man who had believed he could tame nature was learning in the most brutal way possible that wild animals never truly forget what they are. The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, as sirens began to wail in the distance. Alan Bennett's fight for life was nearly over. The pool that had once been a symbol of his unique relationship with one of nature's most dangerous predators had become his tomb. By the time the first emergency vehicles arrived, Alan's movements had ceased entirely. His body floated motionless. in blue-stained water, while Gambino maintained his deadly hold on what had once been his trusted caretaker. Chapter 6: Emergency Response and Aftermath. Within 12 minutes of Margaret Phillips' frantic 911 call, the first emergency vehicles arrived at Alan Bennett's property. Paramedics, sheriff's deputies, and officers from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department converged on the scene with military precision. The sight that greeted them was something from a horror movie. The pool water was dark with blood, looking more like red wine than the clear blue it had been just hours earlier. Debris floated on the surface, mixed with torn pieces, Avalon's clothing scattered by Gambino's violent thrashing. The massive crocodile was still in the pool near the deep end, his powerful body floating with the casual indifference of a predator that had just fed. Gambino's eyes tracked the movement of the arriving officers, but he showed no signs of aggression toward them. Wildlife Officer James Wright immediately recognized the complexity of the rescue operation they were facing. "We had to assume Alan might still be alive," he remembered, but getting to him meant going through 800 pounds of crocodile thought had just killed someone. The first priority was establishing a secure perimeter around the enclosure. Officers positioned themselves at strategic points armed with tranquilizer equipment and long-handled tools, designed for controlling dangerous reptiles. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the wildlife veterinarian called to the scene, arrived within 20 minutes, carrying specialized tranquilizer drugs. "Crocodiles require very specific dosages," she explained later. "Too little and you just make them angry. Too much and you can cause respiratory failure." The process of sedating Gambino was complicated by his size and the fact that he was partially submerged. Dr. Hernandez had to calculate the dosage based on estimated body weight, scent factor in the stress and adrenaline coursing through the crocodile's system following the attack. Using a long-range dart gun, she administered the first tranquilizer shot to Gambino's thick hide near his shoulder. The massive reptile barely reacted to the injection, his prehistoric nervous system registering the intrusion as nothing more than a minor irritation. "It takes time for the drugs to take effect," Dr. Hernandez explained to the assembled Drusk team. "We needed to wait at least 15 minutes before attempting any kind of approach." While waiting for the tranquilizer to work, paramedics set up their equipment on the pool deck, ready to begin life-saving procedures the moment they could safely reach Alan's body. A helicopter was placed on standby to transport him to the nearest trauma hospital, if there was any chance of survival. Officer Wright and his team used long poles to carefully probe the pool, trying to locate Alan without getting within range of Gambino's massive jaws. "We knew he was down there somewhere," Wright recalled, "but the water was so murky with blood and algae that we couldn't see more than a few inches below the surface." 25 minutes after the first tranquilizer dart, Dr. Hernandez administered a second dose. Gambino's movements had become sluggish, but his eyes were still alert. "Crocodiles are incredibly resilient," she noted. "Their metabolism is so slow that drugs affect them differently than mammals." It wasn't until nearly 40 minutes after the rescue operation began that Gambino finally succumbed to the sedatives. His massive head sank below the surface, and his powerful tail stopped its lazy undulations. Only then did Officer Wright give the signal for the water recovery team to enter the pool. 2 experienced divers slip into the blood-darkened water, wearing full protective gear. The visibility was so poor that they had to work entirely by feel, using their hands to search the bottom of the pool while maintaining constant communication with the safety. "Found him," came the radio call after 8 agonizing minutes of searching. "He's near the drain at the deep end. We need the backboard and additional hands." What the divers found was devastating. Alan Bennett's Body Showed, Chapter 6, Emergency Response and Aftermath. Alan fought with the desperate strength of a man who knew death was moments away. He clawed at Gambino's eyes, kicked with what little power he had left, and thrashed against the crocodile's iron grip. But it was like trying to stop a freight train with bare hands. The death rolls continued, methodical, relentless, lethal, each one designed by millions of years of evolution to maim, disorient, and kill. Bones shattered, organs tore. Alan's vision dimmed as shock and blood loss claimed his strength. His efforts weakened by the second. The man who once believed he could tame nature was being taught the cruelest truth. Wild creatures never forget what they are. The attack lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When sirens finally echoed in the distance, Alan's struggle had nearly ended. The pool, once a symbol of trust and connection between man and beasts, had become his tomb by the time the first emergency units arrived. Alan's body floated lifelessly in the blood-stained water, his leg mangled beyond recognition. Gambino still held on, as if unwilling to release his former caretaker. Within 12 minutes of Margaret Phillips' frantic 911 call, the street outside Alan Bennett's home was swarming with flashing lights and coordinated response teams. Paramedics, sheriff's deputies, and Texas Parks and Wildlife officers moved in with swift, practiced urgency. What they found looked like a scene from a horror film. The once clear pool was now dark red, the water murky with blood and debris. Shreds of clothing floated on the surface, shredded by the thrashing of the massive reptile. Gambino hovered near the deep end, half submerged and still calm. Almost eerily so, his unblinking eyes tracking the newcomers without fear or aggression. Wildlife. Officer James Wright assessed the situation immediately. "We had to assume Alan might still be alive," he later said, but getting to him meant facing 800 pounds of raw power that had just killed someone. The first priority was establishing a secure perimeter around the enclosure. Officers took up strategic positions, armed with tranquilizer rifles and long-handled control tools designed for dangerous reptiles. The atmosphere was tense, the stakes immense. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a wildlife veterinarian, arrived with a case of specialized tranquilizers. "Crocodiles are tricky," she explained later. "Too little and you only irritate them. Too much and you risk shutting down their organs." Because Gambino was partially submerged, sedating him required estimating his body weight, factoring in post-attack adrenaline levels, and shooting through thick hide with enough force to deliver the dose effectively. Dr. Hernandez raised a dart, rifle, and fired. The dart struck near the shoulder. Gambino barely reacted. "It takes time," she told the rescue team. "We need to wait at least 15 minutes before approaching." While they waited, paramedics prepared life-saving equipment. On the pool deck, hoping against hope, there was something left to save. A medevac helicopter stood by, ready to transport Alan to a trauma center if they could retrieve him in time. Officer Wright's team used long poles to probe the water cautiously. "We knew he was in there," Wright recalled, "but the visibility was nearly zero. We couldn't see more than a few inches through all the blood and algae." After 25 minutes, with Gambino still alert but slowing, Dr. Hernandez administered a second tranquilizer dose. The crocodile began to grow sluggish, his movements less purposeful, but his eyes remained watchful. "Crocodiles have incredibly slow metabolisms," she said. "Their bodies respond differently than mammals. You have to be patient." It took 40 minutes before Gambino's body finally went still. His head dipped below the surface. His tail ceased its hypnotic sway. Only then did Officer Wright give the order. 2 divers in full protective gear entered the pool with caution. The water was dark and thick. Visibility was non-existent. They had to rely entirely on touch, sweeping the bottom with outstretched arms while staying in constant radio contact with the surface. 8 agonizing minutes passed. Found him, came the call over the radio. He's near the drain at the deep end. We need the backboard and more hands. What they found was devastating. The unmistakable signs of a crocodile attack left no room for doubt. Alan's body bore massive trauma to the right leg, multiple puncture wounds from Gambino's jaws, and clear evidence of drowning. Yet, his face appeared oddly peaceful, almost serene, haunting contrast to the brutality that had ended his life. The recovery took another 20 minutes as rescue workers carefully removed his body from the water. Paramedics immediately began resuscitation efforts, though it was tragically clear to everyone on scene that Alan had been gone for some time. Dr. Michael Roberts, the emergency room physician who later examined Alan's body, confirmed the cause of death, a combination of massive blood loss and drowning. The initial bite severed the femoral artery, he explained. Even with immediate care, injuries like these are rarely survivable. In accordance with protocol for dangerous captive animals involved in human fatalities, the decision was made to euthanize Gambino. That evening, the 13-foot crocodile, once Alan's pride and joy, was put down by lethal injection. News of Alan Bennett's death tore through Riverside Valley like wildfire. Local broadcasts picked up the story within hours. By nightfall, it was national news. The exotic animal community was particularly shaken. "This is exactly what we've warned about for years," said Dr. Robert Kane, director of the National Exotic Animal Safety Foundation. "Wild predators aren't pets. They don't bond with humans the way domestic animals do. They operate on instinct. Those instincts can turn deadly in an instant." Alan's family issued a brief but heartfelt statement through their attorney. Alan died doing what he loved. He believed deeply in the bond between humans and animals, even the most misunderstood ones. While we are heartbroken by this tragedy, we do not want his death to be used to demonize all exotic animal owners. But for many in the community, the damage had already been done. Property values in the neighborhood dropped sharply. Prospective buyers voiced fears about what other dangerous creatures might be hidden behind suburban fences. Chapter 7: Lessons and Legacy. Alan Bennett's death sent shockwaves through the exotic animal world and reignited long-standing debates about private ownership of dangerous species. Animal behaviorists, wildlife officials, emergency responders, and legislators all pointed to a grim but unified conclusion. This could have been prevented. Dr. Lisa Thompson, a leading crocodilian behavior specialist, was brought in to assess the behavioral triggers behind the attack. Her findings exposed a pattern of missed warnings and dangerous misinterpretations. Crocodiles are territorial animals with complex social hierarchies, she explained at a press conference one week. After the incident, as they mature, their instincts intensify, especially during seasonal transitions. What Alan believed to be signs of bonding, she said, were more likely signs of submission, conditioning, delicate balance that can collapse without warning. And the timing of the attack was no coincidence. September marks the start of breeding season for many crocodilian species, a period of heightened aggression and hormonal spikes. Stress responses escalate, Dr. Thompson said, and their tolerance for perceived threats drops to nearly zero. Alan had worked with Gambino for 7 years without serious incident. But that apparent peace had fostered a dangerous illusion that time equaled trust. It didn't. Duration doesn't equal domestication, Dr. Thompson warned. It just means the right combination of triggers hadn't occurred yet. When they finally did, the results were tragic and inevitable. The investigation into Alan's death revealed a trove of documentation he had kept throughout his years with Gambino: videos, photos, handwritten notes, feeding logs. It was a detailed chronicle of the crocodile's growth from a small hatchling to a 13-foot apex predator. Detective Maria Santos, who led the investigation, called the evidence heartbreaking and revealing. You could see Alan's love in every frame, she said. But you could also see the gradual changes in Gambino changes that Alan either didn't recognize or didn't want to. Behavior experts reviewed the footage. What they saw was clear. Subtle shifts in Gambino's body language, more aggressive. Feeding responses, increased territorial behavior. Dozens of red flags that should have prompted a change in handling, if not a re-evaluation of the entire relationship. Alan's family and friends struggled to understand how someone so knowledgeable could make such a catastrophic error. At a memorial service attended by hundreds, his brother David tried to put the heartbreak into words. Alan wasn't reckless. He said, voice trembling. He truly believed he had a unique bond with Gambino. He thought he understood that animal better than anyone ever could. David paused, choking back emotion. He used to tell me that Gambino trusted him completely, that their connection went beyond any normal human-animal bond. But that belief, that absolute confidence, it's what cost him his life. The service brought together voices from every corner of Alan's world. Wildlife rehabilitators praised his compassion. Neighbors remembered his generosity. But representatives from Texas Parks and Wildlife used the opportunity to deliver a stark warning. Exotic animal ownership carries a cost sometimes, the ultimate one. In the wake of Alan's death, the Texas legislature began a fast-tracked review of the state's exotic animal laws. While regulations already existed, the case exposed serious flaws in enforcement, education, and oversight. State Representative Maria Rodriguez, a longtime advocate for reform, suddenly found herself with bipartisan momentum. We need comprehensive change, she said during a legislative hearing. Stronger screening for permits, mandatory training, regular psychological evaluations, surprise inspections, she added, and most importantly, we need people to understand that keeping a dangerous predator is not the same as owning a dog or a cat. The legislation that emerged from the hearings, officially called Alan's Law but nicknamed the Bennett Act by supporters, was unanimously passed by both chambers of the Texas legislature. It mandates strict safety protocols for anyone keeping large reptiles or other dangerous species. Requirements include mandatory insurance coverage, emergency response plans, and annual psychological evaluations of exotic animal owners to detect dangerous anthropomorphism under the new law. Owners must prove not only their ability to care for such animals, but also their understanding of the inherent risks. All exotic animal facilities are subject to at least 2 surprise inspections per year. Additionally, the law establishes a fund to help law enforcement acquire specialized equipment for responding to exotic animal emergencies. Perhaps most notably, Alan's Law requires exotic animal owners to complete an annual education course focused on recognizing behavioral warning signs. The curriculum includes case studies like Alan's, confronting owners with the grim reality of what can happen when instinct overrides years of training. Animal rescue groups quickly embraced Alan's story as a cautionary tale. His experience became a powerful teaching tool used to educate prospective buyers about the realities of exotic animal ownership. People see a video of someone swimming with a crocodile and think it looks amazing, said Maria Santos, director of the Texas Wildlife Rescue Network. They don't see the years of danger, the constant vigilance, the fact that one moment of inattention can end in tragedy. The National Exotic Animal Safety Foundation built an entire educational program around Alan's case, featuring video reenactments, behavioral analyses, and expert commentary. That program is now mandatory for exotic animal permit applicants in 12 states. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the herpetologist who had tried to warn Alan, found herself in a bittersweet position, both vindicated and heartbroken. "I take no satisfaction in being right about this," she said in a televised interview 6 months after the attack. Alan was a good man who loved animals, but love isn't enough when you're dealing with creatures hardwired to kill. What makes Alan's story most haunting is how preventable it was. Every expert who evaluated his setup warned him. Every wildlife officer who inspected the facility raised concerns. Every friend who voiced worry was dismissed. Alan was a good man who loved animals, said longtime friend Mike Torres. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that love doesn't change nature. Wild animals are wild, no matter how much we care about them. The psychological impact of the tragedy rippled far beyond Alan's immediate circle. First responders who witnessed the attack required counseling. Margaret Phillips, the neighbor who made the frantic 911 call, moved out within 3 months. She couldn't bear to look at the empty lot where Alan's enclosure once stood. "I still have nightmares," she said in a victim impact statement read aloud at the hearings. "I hear his screams. I see the blood in the water. No one should ever witness something like that. No one should have to live next to that kind of danger." The community continued to feel the aftershocks. Property values in the neighborhood dropped. Prospective buyers were afraid of what other dangerous animals might be hiding behind suburban fences. Several exotic Tanama owners voluntarily surrendered their permits rather than face increased scrutiny. Insurance companies began denying policies in neighborhoods known to house exotic pets. Banks started requiring exotic animal disclosures before approving mortgages. The very fabric of suburban life was forced to confront a hard truth. Dangerous predators were living among families today. Alan Bennett's property stands vacant. The pool has been filled in. The enclosure is gone. But his story remains a sobering reminder. It's a story about the thin line between fascination and obsession, about the difference between respect and recklessness, and above all, about the eternal tension between two forces: humanity's desire to bond with nature, and nature's raw, untamable power. In the end, Alan Bennett's legacy is not just the tragic way he died, it's the lessons his death leaves behind. The importance of respecting wild animals for what they truly are: majestic, powerful, and forever untamable. Creatures guided by instincts stronger than any human bond. His story reminds us that no amount of love, commitment, or wishful thinking can change the nature of a predator. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. Sometimes, the wisest choice is accepting that some bonds are too dangerous to pursue. If you found this story compelling, consider sharing it to raise awareness about exotic animal safety For more true encounters between humans and dangerous wildlife, subscribe to Animal Ambush and Encounters. Thank you for watching and remember, respect the wild.